Hey, hello, what's up everyone? In this video, I'm going to teach you about what happens when Mercury is sitting in the 7th house of the D9 chart or Navamsha chart in Vedic astrology. So, before beginning, if you are not subscribed to my channel, please subscribe to my channel, hit the bell icon and click the like button. And if you have any doubt after watching this video, please do mention it in my below comment section, okay? And yes, please like and follow my Facebook community page Parikshit Astrology, where you can also post some astrological stuff and gain knowledge. So let's begin. So mainly, what do you mean by Navamsha chart of the D9 chart? See, Navamsha chart of the D9 chart is the second most important chart after a birth chart. It is mainly seen for your strengths of your planet. It is also seen for your relationship between you and your spouse and also your married life. See, mainly Navamsha chart of the D9 chart gets activated after your second half of your life or after your married life or after 33 years or 36 years of your age. Now, coming to the strengths of your planet. Now, let's say for example, if any planet is deviated in your birth chart. Now, let's say for example, if Sun is deviated in your birth chart and that planet Sun has been exalted in your Navamsha chart or the D9 chart, that shows that that planet Sun has gained extra strength or extra power. Now, coming to the married life. See, every individual divisional chart, including the main birth chart, has its own Karaka planet or the significator planet, right? For example, in the birth chart, Sun is the Karaka planet or the significator planet, right? Likewise, in your Navamsha chart or the D9 chart, Venus is the Karaka planet or the significator planet. So, Venus should be placed in an exalted sign, Mool Trikon sign, own sign or in a friendly sign. That shows that your married life will be very good. Now, coming to the 7th house of the D9 chart or Navamsha chart. Now, what does 7th house of the D9 chart or Navamsha chart represents? It represents your spouse characteristics, your spouse attitude, your spouse personality. It also represents your ability to compromise in the marriage. So, these are all the things can be seen through the 7th house of the D9 chart or Navamsha chart in Vedic astrology. Now, what happens when Mercury is sitting in the 7th house of D9 chart or Navamsha chart? Now, what does planet Mercury represents? It represents your intelligence. It also represents your logical ability. It also represents your communication. It also represents business. So when Mercury is sitting in the 7th house of the D9 chart or Navamsha chart, it shows that you will get a spouse who might be very good at communication, and it also shows that your marriage will be like business partnership. It also shows that after your married life, your spouse will talk to you so much that you will get irritated sometimes also, and it also shows that you will get a youthful spouse. Now, what happens when Mercury is conjuncted with different planets? That is the benefic planets and malefic planets in the 7th house of the D9 chart or Navamsha chart. Now, when Mercury is conjuncted with the benefic planets like Jupiter, Moon and Venus. Now, coming to the planet Moon. Now, what happens when Mercury is conjuncted with planet Moon? Now, what does planet Moon represent? It represents your mother, it represents your happiness, it represents your mind, your emotions. Now, when Moon and Mercury are conjunct in the 7th house of the D9 chart or Navamsha chart, that shows that you will get a spouse who might be very beautiful, who might be very good at communication, who might be very emotional, who might be practical when it comes to matter of business. So these are all things can be seen through when Moon and Mercury are conjuncted in the 7th house of the D9 chart or Navamsha chart. Now it also shows that your mother's health will be very good and you will get happiness from both your mother and your spouse. It also shows that your spouse and your mother might fight. That is like there might be some verbal arguments between your mother and your spouse. So you need to be a little bit careful here. Now, what happens when Mercury is conjuncted with planet Jupiter? Now, what does planet Jupiter represent? It represents your teacher. It also represents counselors, advisors. So, when Jupiter and Mercury are conjuncted in the 7th house of the D9 chart or Navamsha chart, it shows that you might get a spouse who might be having ego. You might get a spouse who might be very practical, who might be very good advisor for you. You might get a spouse who might be very good teacher or who might teach you. It also shows that you will get a spouse who might be very good at finance, handling finance and all, who will be good at money management and all. So these are all the things can be seen through when Mercury and Jupiter are conjuncted in the 7th house of the D9 chart and Navamsha chart in Vedic astrology. Now, what happens when Mercury is conjuncted with planet Venus? That shows that you will get a spouse who might be very good looking, who might be very good at creativity and all. Why? Because Venus represents creativity, luxurious life. Venus represents beauty, love, romance. So when Venus and Mercury are conjuncted in the 7th house of the D9 chart or Navamsha chart, that shows that you will get a spouse who might be very romantic, who might be very good at creativity, who might be very good at artistic works and all. So these are all things can be seen through when Venus and Mercury are conjuncted in the 7th house of the D9 chart or Navamsha chart. Now, what happens when Mercury is conjuncted with malefic planets like Sun, Mars, Rahu, Ketu and Saturn? Now, when Mercury is conjuncted planet Sun in the 7th house, that shows that you will get a spouse who might be very dominating, who might be working at a government jobs, who might be a very good leader, or who might be having some leadership qualities, because Sun represents king, government, Sun represents leader, right? Sun represents ego. So it also shows that you might get a spouse who might be having ego also. So these are all the things can be seen through where Mercury and Sun are conjuncted in the 7th house of the D9 chart or Navamsha chart. Now, what happens when Mercury is conjuncted with planet Mars? Now, what does planet Mars represent? It represents aggressive nature. It also represents cruel planet. So, when Mercury and Mars are conjuncted in the 7th house of the D9 chart or Navamsha chart, it shows that you will get a spouse who might be having very aggressive type of personality. It also shows that you might get a spouse who might be very cruel at heart or cruel by nature. So, these are all things can be seen through when Mercury and Mars are conjuncted in the 7th house of the D9 chart or Navamsha chart. Now, it also shows that you will get a spouse who might negotiate also sometimes. So, Mercury alone in the 7th house might shows you might get a spouse who might negotiate, or you both might negotiate each other. Your spouse might be having some friendly nature like that. So, these are all things can be seen through when Mercury is sitting in the 7th house and also with Mars. Now, what happens when Mercury is conjuncted with planet Saturn? Now, what does planet Saturn represents? It represents a hardworking planet. It also represents lazy planet. It also represents like your karma. It also represents old looking nature, right? So when Saturn and Mercury are conjuncted in the 7th house or D9 chart or Navamsha chart, it shows that you will get a spouse who might be very old looking, who might be matured, who might be practical, who might be very hardworking, and who might be business minded. So these are all things can be seen through when Saturn and Mercury are conjuncted in the 7th house of the D9 chart or Navamsha chart. Now, what happens when Mercury is conjuncted with planet Rahu? Now, what does Rahu represents? It represents illusion, Maya, exotic planet, right? So, when Mercury and Rahu are conjuncted in the 7th house of the D9 chart or Navamsha chart, that shows that you might be having some problems with your married life or with your personal relationship between you and your spouse. And it also shows that you might be having some misunderstandings between you and your spouse. So, these are all the things can be seen through when Mercury and Rahu are conjuncted in the 7th house of the D9 chart or Navamsha chart in Vedic astrology. Now, it also shows that you might get a spouse who might be stranger also sometimes or foreigner. Now, what happens when Mercury is conjuncted with planet Ketu? Now, what does planet Ketu represent? It represents separation, divorce. So, when Ketu and Mercury are conjuncted in the 7th house of the D9 chart or Navamsha chart, it shows that you might get a spouse who love to do spiritual things and all. It also shows that you might be living far away from your spouse sometimes. It also shows that your spouse might love isolations and all, like isolated area or isolated place. You might not understand your spouse, the way your spouse talks. So these are all the things can be seen through when Mercury and Ketu are conjuncted in the 7th house of the D9 chart or Navamsha chart in Vedic astrology. So yep, this is it for today, guys. So this was my analysis about what happens when Mercury is sitting in the 7th house of the D9 chart or Navamsha chart. So if you are new to my channel, please subscribe below, or else I'll see you in the next video. So if you want any consultancy, please to contact my given below WhatsApp number, or else you can even mail me also. So until and unless, thank you, bye bye, love you, take care.